by SCI families as an essential national resource for spinal cord injured families in the first days, weeks, and months of SCI crisis, when life turns upside down. And few medical teams in the U.S. have SCI expertise or lived experience. The SCI navigators bring essential support, connections, life expertise, and resources. Blink of an Eye nonprofit deploys a rapid response HEAL team for ICU bedside support to create an extraordinary experience despite the devastation for SCI families. And a personal SCI navigator for 24/7 support in the first 90 days and throughout the miracle year. Blink of an Eye nonprofit also provides a multidisciplinary wraparound team and SCI expert medical panel. Stay tuned for their launch of the first National Digital Resource Library, the SCI Playbook, chocked full of essential SCI information and trauma-informed responses for the first hours, days, and months after injury. To find out more, get involved, or to make a donation, visit www.blinkofaneye.org. Today, I talk with Brad Leng, a neuroscientist whose early research led to the invention of the intracellular sigma peptide, or ISP, a breakthrough drug now forming the foundation of NervGen's promising new treatment for spinal cord injury. It all started in Dr. Jerry Silver's lab, where big ideas were taken seriously. You're about to hear about what it takes to coax damaged nerves to regrow, the hurdles and the heartbreaks that come with trying to repair the central nervous system, and the hope of what ISP and the NervGen trials could mean for the future of spinal cord injury and other conditions. Stay tuned. Season 5 of Blink of an Eye is dedicated to illustrating the behind-the-scenes intricacies, the joys and the hardships of spinal cord injury, and the remarkable navigation and life integration, beginning with the moment of injury itself, following the progression of what happens to the injured person and their family. We will begin with the blink of an eye moment and travel through the miracle year and into what life that has normalized spinal cord injury looks like on the inside, and end with a look back on the years of living with spinal cord injury and living a life of trauma integration. I am blessed to introduce you to Brad Leng. Brad Leng, PhD, is a neuroscientist and biotech inventor focused on repairing the central nervous system after injury. He earned his PhD in neuroscience from Case Western Reserve University, where he co-invented the intracellular sigma peptide, ISP, that helped launch NervGen Pharma in bringing ISP to clinical trials for acute spinal cord injury. Now, Vice President of Research at Convello Therapeutics, Brad leads remyelination drug development for spinal cord injury and conditions like MS. His work bridges cutting-edge science and clinical application with a focus on restoring function in the chronic phase of injury. Today, we will explore the intracellular sigma peptide and Brad's journey, which began in Dr. Jerry Silver's lab. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here on your show. I'm a big fan of your show and your advocacy network and everything that you do for patients with spinal cord injury. I thought it as a disclosure to start this interview, as you mentioned in my introduction, I am the inventor of ISP, which is now known as NVG-291, and I am a co-founder and equity shareholder of NervGen, although I do not have any current involvement with them at this time. All my comments will be based on historical perspective. I do not have, like I said, an official relationship with them at this moment.
Thank you for that disclosure. And speaking of historical comments, let's go back and learn about you, the inventor, where you're from. I also just really love to hear about creative people and the aspects of their childhood that shaped them. And I'm wondering if you can give us a glimpse of yours and what motivated you to study neuroscience.
Great question, and thank you for that. So I grew up in the absolute middle of nowhere of Wisconsin in a small farming community named Campbellsport, which is about halfway in between Milwaukee and Green Bay. And if you take the sharpest pencil you have and put a dot on the map, you may come close to hitting it. And there I had a typical small rural high school life. I excelled academically, and I was on the soccer team, and ended up at the University of Wisconsin, where I was 100% sure I was going to be a pharmacist. And that lasted about a year, and then I was 100% sure I was going to do the typical biomedical track and become a MD doctor, probably focused on like emergency medicine, because I had met doctors doing that, and it seemed like a good career. And that got me through about my sophomore year of college, where I joined the lab of a brilliant professor named Raghu Vemuganti, who is studying why your brain dies after an ischemic stroke in the neurosurgery department. And his influence could not be greater on me. He sold me on the entire world of not just research, but neuroscience in general. Neuroscience was and still is just a completely open-ended field. There's so much unknown. It's a complete white space. Any mechanism you study is just completely open. And that is generally what motivated me. I got my mission in his lab, doing research, looking at cells growing, looking at cells dying, and trying to answer big questions, not iterative single-use questions, but big questions like, why doesn't the nervous system regenerate, is a big question. Ultimately, that led me to apply to graduate schools for neuroscience. I was introduced to Dr. Jerry Silver at my interview, along with the other neuroscience professors at Case Western Reserve, and it was just and still is, an absolutely world-class program for developing young researchers. And they recruited me in, and the rest is history. I now focus on trying to develop therapies to answer big questions like NerveGen with why doesn't the spinal cord regenerate? Or the second attempt there with Convello, can you develop a remyelination therapeutic?
It's also exciting. It just reminds me of, at those who are studying space and the universe and the ocean, they're just these huge spaces that we know so much and so little about.
Absolutely. And I think that's what attracts most people to neuroscience is it's just such an unknown. There's so much room for iteration.
Well, I'm wondering, Brad, if you might share with us, where did it all start, since we're interested in understanding about intracellular sigma peptide? Where did it all start? Were you working with Dr. Silver?
So I've had a good amount of time this year to reflect. With the passing of Jerry Silver late last year, all of us graduate students had time to reflect on his entire career. I was able to give the keynote at his memorial seminar in May or June and really discuss with all of his students of his 40-plus year career arc, from one of the founding neuroanatomists to now creating a drug to potentially help people with spinal cord injury. Now, as a scientist, and especially as a translationally focused scientist, it's always a dream to create something, a drug, a device, a tool that improves human health. That's what got me to Jerry's lab. I was a graduate student with him from 2009 to 2015 in the neurosciences department at Case Western. I believe you've had Jerry on the podcast before. He is, his mind will certainly be missed. He was such a brilliant and creative professor with 40 plus years of just knowledge being generated.
I'll actually just share with you, just so that our listeners don't go back and scroll. I had so wanted to have Jerry on, in fact, the very month that he passed away, because we had covered with one of the program managers of the trial at SRA Lab what it was all about. It, we weren't sure if it caused the stock, and I just bowed out.
Sure.
And just waited on the sidelines, talking to many people. But I missed that and was very forlorn, because he was such a great mind and had incredible, from my perspective, stamina in what he continued to believe in despite so many arrows and naysayers.
Yeah, he was certainly a pioneer. He was the first to discover some of the molecules within scarring in the nervous system. He's one of the first to tell the world that it was the scar itself that prevents the axons from regrowing following an injury, like a spinal cord injury or a peripheral nerve injury. And then I believe he's the first to understand the tools needed to unlock that repair mechanisms, the lock and key mechanisms. And that all happened. There's this 40-year career arc from just simple observations leading to this phase 2 result from NerveGen, which is just incredible.
Well, I'm curious with that, and you're being in his lab for 6 years. What was it that you, before we get into, the topic of the day, the ISP, what was it that you learned from Jerry that was significant in your career path and in your quest?
That is a fantastic question. It's challenging to answer that simply. Jerry was always there. He attracted a very specific type of graduate student that was capable of thinking outside the box and pushing the envelope. And he gave those students the tools needed to be successful in his career. And he was always there when you got stuck. If you had a problem you couldn't solve, Jerry was there to help you solve it. And he was the most excitable guy. Any individual finding, no matter how small, Jerry would react like you just won a Nobel Prize. And he was just that version of a boss or cheerleader or mentor that was just always there for you. He always, all of his students, there's many of us. At any given time, there was 2 to 5 graduate students and a couple postdoctoral fellows in his lab. He liked to, lob big ideas at us. And just to see what stuck. And maybe some of these research projects went nowhere. Maybe they did go somewhere. The ones he lobbed at me were really twofold. He wanted me to understand the long-term interactions between the scar and non-regenerating axons that had tried to regenerate, but somehow failed. He wanted me to further elucidate why that was happening. And I spent an absolutely ridiculous number of hours watching axons not grow. Because we had developed all these tools and assay systems. And what I had discovered is if these axons just grow into scar-like assays, they stop their growth altogether and just stabilize. They're not dead. They're just living there in perfect harmony, not moving. And I imaged these axons for days on end, basically living in a time-lapse microscopy room. Later in my PhD, I figured out how to automate all of that, but at the early time, it was just single focus.
Wow. I'm wondering if that's where our son was injured in 2015, and one of the adages of the day was that you had 24 months to wake up, any cell that was on its way to die. And that was it. Of course, we've come a long way since then, but was that some of the research that people would have been calling upon, or where they thought it was a dead end?
Yeah, there wasn't much known even 2015. It was and still is hard to conduct clinical trials, but the adage was, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So you had to figure out a way to stimulate these nerves or reconnect them or get them firing again, and otherwise they die. I don't know if that's true. I think some of the nerve gen enrolling patients 10 years post-injury and showing a significant reconnectivity to upper extremity muscles may suggest that your axons are there. They're just embedded within the glial scar, living somewhere where they shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. And you don't see this broad atrophy or death of the cell bodies.
Yeah, I think it's such an important distinguisher that the cells don't actually die. They're just embedded in this scar tissue, very happily living, but not moving.
Yeah, a brilliant graduate student at the same time as me studied this interaction more. Her name's Angela Philos, and just described the interaction and how they form these synaptic-like connections on these scarring cells and just overall just get stuck. Scar tissue is sticky. It's basically cartilage. It's meant to wall off areas, and ultimately your cells just grow into it and stop.
So take us back to the moment when ISP was first discovered.
Yeah, so like I said, my project was twofold. So the first was looking at all these cells not growing. And the second was to follow up on a discovery that was, in a way, discovered by my wife, who she was not my wife at the time, but she was a senior graduate student named Sarah Bush, had made in collaboration with a lab at Harvard, that there is this receptor, this phosphatase named PTP sigma, that is the receptor for chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans. And before, it was not known the molecular machinery behind scar-based inhibition or chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans, but now we had a target. So the other half of my PhD and research project was to further elucidate how this worked. Big idea. Here's a tool. Here's a single protein. Here's a biology. Figure out how it works. We are scientists at hand. There's literature on that's going back 20, 30 years, not on PTP sigma. Otherwise it would have a better name, but on like other molecules that are related to it, like CD45, which is a very important protein in immunology and non-self recognition, is a cousin to PTP sigma. And there's a protein called leukocyte common antigen related, or LAR, which is a sister to PTP sigma, which are just, they don't mean much, but they're much more studied in their specific realms, which is typically immunology. And we used those as the basis. What is known about the cousin molecules? What is known about the sister molecules? And how are they regulated? And we found out that they're complex. There's intracellular domains, there's extracellular domains, and we used basically guess and check biology to go through some of these domains one by one. And one domain stood out to us. It's this helix loop helix. It looks like a wedge domain in CD45 and LAR that seemed to control its dimerization. And there was a happy hour somewhere around 2010. Our department liked to put on happy hours on Friday to get all the students and professors together in one room so that we could chat in a more open setting and see where your research projects overlapped. And we were just chatting about my research project, and we ended up back in the lab. My junior graduate student at the time, his name's Jared Craig, who's now a professor at the University of Wisconsin, just threw out, what if you could just make a mimetic of the wedge domain of PTP sigma? What if you could just make an intracellular sigma peptide? And just so happened, another graduate student named Elon Wang happened to be in the lab and just opened his computer. And all three of us right there just aligned the sequences of PTP sigma, LAR, and CD45 and identified for the first time this looped helix domain that was also found in PTP sigma. Later that night, I connected it to a intracellular localization domain, this TAP domain, and then a single linker in between because I thought that would be important, and sent it off to be ordered, along with some other random ideas that never saw the light of day. And a couple weeks later, it comes in, we test it, and it just works unbelievably well in cells. So we put it on these cells that are exposed to like scar-like conditions, and the axons just grow right through. We had only really seen this once before, and that's when you dissolve the scar with chondroitinase. But this was like an actually molecular tool to allow these cells to ignore scar conditions.
Wow.
So Jerry, being Jerry, is just wildly excited about this.
I'm excited just hearing it. It's just amazing. All from a happy hour.
Yeah, all from a happy hour. But I mean, it doesn't become what it is if it doesn't actually work to regrow axons in a body. So we had with Jerry's spinal cord injury lab, we had these spinal cord injury rodent models available to us that animals are paralyzed, and you can use them as a tool, monitor their behavior, such as walking, balance, and bladder, along with anatomy, and see if your drug. So I made an educated guess on what dose would work. And we just started injecting animals with an entry dose of ISP along with a couple control. And it's a blinded study. We injected for, I believe, 7 weeks. And Jerry tells a completely different story here, but the reason we chose 7 weeks is because I believe I had to go on vacation and I didn't have anyone to dose for me the next day. And I thought, 7 weeks enough. So, and then we just let the animals go for another month or so. And then unblinded it. So you do these studies in a blinded fashion, like any study. And the 6 animals that got ISP were the 6 highest responders. They all had started walking. They all had started urinating again. They had restored their balance. And just, I ran to Jerry's office like, you have to see this. And he's like, I don't believe it. Do it again. So we did it again and again and again, each time validating. I think we replicated it 5 times over the course of, and extended it over the course of many years. And it just kept working and working. And then we started sending it off to other people. If we're regrowing axons through a spinal cord scar, are we regrowing axons through other scars as well? So we sent it to a heart attack lab, and they showed that the exact same thing is true. Following a heart attack, your sympathetic nerves withdraw from the muscle scar of your heart, and they stabilize on your intact myocardia, which causes uneven electrical activity or an arrhythmia. And if you treat with our drug, they'll regrow into and through the scar and relieve arrhythmia. We sent it to a peripheral nerve lab. Same process. They injure the peripheral nerves here and watch axons regrow through that scar.
Through the left shoulder.
Yeah, left shoulder and rodent models. It went to an Alzheimer's lab, a Parkinson's lab, a MS lab, showing that short distance axon regeneration is effective there. It became this, in a way, tool compound for regenerating growth. We published our results in Nature in 2015. I actually I have a couple copies of it still. I grabbed it out along with the heart attack paper as a companion. They were published on the same day. And the peripheral nerve injury paper came out about a week or so later. I looked it up. We have, since 2015, when we published this, there are, I think, 250 distinct publications that have used our tool that we developed to regrow axons or test biology in some way.
Wow. Let's just pause on that. You know, the quality of life and lives that the discovery that you stayed up all night after the happy hour to run through and send off has made for who knows, right? Thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, I look back, it's a surreal experience. Looking back at it now and all the time and effort that was put into this. And I couldn't imagine it becoming what it is today. You always hope. There's always that like flicker of hope that you're going to discover something, that the chances of it actually happening are rare. And it's just a surreal experience.
And would you say with that surreal experience that it was a similar experience as that was shared with you by Jerry?
Oh,
or did he have a different take on it?
I mean, Jerry, I really wish Jerry was alive to see this come to fruition. His memorial was on the Friday before the data was released. The data was released on June 2nd, which was his birthday. And I joke with people that he would have found a bullhorn and would be walking around promoting this data as the most excitable person around. The prediction he made was true, and he finally was able to find a therapeutic to potentially help spinal cord injury.
That day is special for me. It's my wedding anniversary, but I feel Jerry in our midst as we speak. He's beaming. So you needed Nerve Gen to bring that into being. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's another great story. I mean, this is not a low-risk project. Spinal cord injury and therapeutic development in spinal cord injury is rife with failure. In a way, no one to date had figured out how to run the clinical trial that would show success or had the wrong target. We can look at Corda Therapeutics with chondroitinase or some of the no-go drugs that were being developed for axon regeneration, and nothing had succeeded to date. And I think Big Pharma was weary about taking a project like this on. I tried for many years to get this launched out of Case Western into a company, but it really took some serendipity. So in 2016, I believe, Harold Punnett, who's a dentist in Canada, his daughter-in-law had a fall and had a traumatic spinal cord injury. And Harold, being the supportive father-in-law he was and father, just started making phone calls to learn as much as he possibly could about the treatment options available for his daughter-in-law, and contacting the best researchers he could find. And he just happened to reach out to both Jerry Silver and my wife at the time, who was running a acute program, in spinal cord injury. And they both directed him to me. And it started this conversation between Harold about what we had developed and what we had done and published. So outside of his family life, Harold also happened to be an angel investor in biotech companies and had a good amount of success. And I think just the passionate person in him saw not just like this opportunity that is twofold for both biotech and to help his family. And he made it his mission to launch this into a company. It took a good year and a half to get it done and get it done correctly, get the license out of the university, hire a CEO. But it all started with that conversation and that email from Harold, reaching out to my entire network at that time.
Blink of an Eye podcast is sponsored by Baltimore Mediation. For over 30 years, Baltimore Mediation has been the choice for clients nationwide seeking breakthroughs in their disputes and changes for their conflicts and complicated interactions at work, in their families, their boards of directors, and their organizations. Baltimore Mediation provides tailored intervention with face-to-face mediation and facilitation from a relational approach, leading with a belief in human capacity and resilience, despite the negative experience of conflict and crisis. Relational mindset, relational outcome. You can learn more at baltimoremediation.com.
So beautiful. We have something in common because blink of an eye's understanding more about nerve gen and having a number of our families in the trial really started with a conversation between a concerned father-in-law and a concerned mom when he and I spoke. Yes, so we all come from this passion to make a difference in the lives of those suffering from spinal cord injury and those around them, because we know there's a quality of life. But I am so curious from a lay person's perspective, and for our listeners who are also lay people, many, but we have many medical following this as well. But can you tell us why axon regeneration is like at the core of what we're interested in learning more about and following, and then a little bit more about the glial scarring?
Sure. Absolutely. Great question. I love to get back to the basics. I think axon regeneration is such a unique process for the body. There are organisms that can regenerate axons really well. There's salamanders and some other organisms I'm blanking on right now, but the humans are not one of them. But in some instances they can, and it's such a bizarre situation. So if you have these bipolar cells that sit right outside your spinal cord in these area called dorsal root ganglia, and they control sensation. Say they extend a process all the way down your arm to your finger, and another process all the way up to your brain, and that's how you generally sense sensation. So it's one cell. If you were to cut that axon in your finger, like near your knuckle, it will eventually regrow back, right? It will reinnervate, and this has been done. People have knife injuries, and they'll eventually regain some feeling and sensation. But that exact same cell, if you were to cut it in your central nervous system, it won't regrow. So it creates this disconnect. A spinal cord injury creates this disconnect between your brain and your body. So as with your finger nerves regrowing to restore sensation, what we would like to do in your spinal cord is regrow that axon back to its target and restore its connectivity moving up. And you can think about that the exact opposite way of the axons and nerves that control movement and descending. They start in your brain or in your brainstem and descend down your spinal cord and eventually innervate your muscles. So if we can regrow them moving downward and reconnect them into your muscle network, which should restore some function. But it's been this holy grail of an idea that no one's figured out the right target or tool in order to do it. And maybe they had and didn't test it in the right way, because science is always evolving and the tools are always getting better.
It reminds me of just anything that's electronic, that's a system. Mm-hmm. But if something like, you fry the control panel,
yeah,
like the central nervous system or the cord itself, being that when everything else actually still works.
Right.
So that the axon regeneration would be for one particular cell?
No, every neuron has an axon. There's groups and collections of axons. They all go to their individual place. Your brain's very complex. Your spinal cord is equally complex. Your spinal cord is basically the collection of cables or wires that connects your brain to your body. Simplified greatly, it does much more than that, but simplified greatly, that's what it does. And with spinal cord injury, you're cutting that collection of cables. So what you need to do is regrow them.
So with previous attempts to regrow, what makes NVG-291 and the mechanism behind NervGen's approach so different from the previous attempts to treat spinal cord injury?
A very good question. I mean, there haven't been, unlike oncology, there have been hundreds and thousands of attempts at treating cancer. There haven't been that many attempts at progressing programs forward to humans to regenerate axons following spinal cord injury or any nerve injury. A couple of them stand out to me. You have chondroitinase, which basically dissolves the components of the scar that prevent axons from regrowing, which I think is a very solid technique. It's just technically very challenging to do, to deliver this enzyme exactly where it's needed, exactly, because you'll have to inject it into the spinal cord itself and into the injury site at the right concentration and have it last long enough.
And that's the reference to the glial scarring.
Correct. Yeah, glial scarring. It dissolves one component of the glial scar thought to be some of the inhibitory molecules. And then you have other people that have identified various. So we worked on PTP sigma, this receptor. Other groups had worked on various other proteins in the nervous system thought to be important in repair mechanisms. There's the no-go's, these collection of proteins called no-go that were identified because they don't allow axons to grow, so they called them no-go. And tools were developed, and it got tested in humans and didn't work as well as people expected. But I think that research is still ongoing.
I'm curious if there's some intelligence behind, for instance, no-go that could be explored.
That clinical trial is still, as far as I know, ongoing for chronic spinal cord injury. The no-go receptor antagonist or the antibody program. And I think they certainly have some data, but I am not aware of their status at this moment. But it's another attempt at restoring connectivity.
And I'm just wondering, before the next aspect of the research, for the no-go, I mean, what's the intelligence of the body that it has these mechanisms at place that stop growth?
It's a very, very good question, and something people have pondered for quite some time. Why do you have systems in place to prevent growth? And why are those systems? So there are areas of your body that you don't have nerves. Your cartilage, for instance, is non-innervated. Your ear is basically cartilage. There's areas of your ear that do not have nerves. Your knee cartilage, your shoulder cartilage, there's not nerves in them. And they're primarily made up of chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans. And we probably evolutionarily developed this molecular machinery to wall off areas that we don't want things to grow into. So when you have a traumatic injury, you have all this cellular damage and debris in one spot. And that is basically a flowing river of lava that's going to destroy everything in its wake as it expands out. And what the body's trying to do is just wall it off. Like prevent this giant area that is now injured from expanding into living tissue. Right. And that's what a scar generally is.
And expanding related to swelling and inflammation?
Yeah, the inflammation from spreading out too far into the areas of your body that were not injured and affecting living tissue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the methylprednisolone literature. That's the cooling following SCI literature. It's all meant to help that process. However, there's probably a negative consequence to that in that you develop the scar and now after you stabilize, your axons can't regrow.
Right.
Not in your central nervous system. If that exact same process happens in your arm or your hand, your body has ways of clearing the scar and allowing growth through it. But that just doesn't happen in your spinal cord. It's protected in a way that probably makes sense evolutionary, but not in terms of spinal cord injury and repair. So, Jerry's entire thesis of literature was not only to understand why this occurs, what is the scar, why does scarring occur, and if we understand that, can we overcome it?
Right. It's such a intelligent response of the brilliance of the body, short term, but not long term.
Yeah, no-go was a different approach altogether. There are other areas of your nervous system that you don't want axons to grow or like keep them apart from each other. No-go probably has a role in that process. There's repulsive guidance molecule A, which I believe Abbott or AbbVie has a program on. Another one of those protein ligand interactions that prevent axons from growing where they're not supposed to grow. The thought is if you drug those systems, things will grow again. Our therapy was the one targeted solely at PTP sigma and solely at the scar.
I was asking the question about how NVG-291 was so different from previous attempts to treat spinal cord injury. Is there anything else that you would want to add to that?
The key differentiators, it should work in chronic injury because your scar exists in chronic injury. And that was one thing that was tested, not actually by me, but by people that came on this program after me. And it was just, we tried to simplify it greatly. It was a once daily injectable is how we tried to develop it for progression. A one a day shot, make it as easy as possible for people to deliver. And that seems to have helped. The clinical trials now are being run as a once daily injectable as well. It's not an infusion. You don't have to go you theoretically wouldn't have to go to the clinic. Not a direct injection into your spinal cord. Not a gene therapy. It was just a once daily injectable.
Right. And if we think about that with regard to if there was efficacy, how accessible,
yes,
ideally that could be. Were you surprised about the mixed media coverage that NVG-291 received?
Yes. There's so much negative news these days. Like every day you turn on your TV or log on to a news site, it's just checkered with negative news stories. This was a positive news story that there was this potential beacon of optimism for patients suffering from paralysis that need that beacon of optimism. I'm not sure what the world was expecting from this trial or what I was expecting, but it certainly exceeded it. The threefold increase in reconnectivity to the upper extremity muscle combined with the restoration of some hand functions is unbelievable in acute patients. But this was done in patients 1 to 10 years post-spinal cord injury, which is just, it exceeded my expectations of a positive result. I think I saw an analyst report that said it was, in baseball terminology, it was a double in a game that had never even had a person on base. Which I think they were being, I would give them a triple on a game that never had a person on base because I am an optimist on this, but we'll see what the days forward come. NerveGen released their top line data, and that's all I've seen as well. And I'm sure they are still analyzing. I've been a part of these programs in the past with other therapies. They're almost certainly sitting on a mountain of data and working their way through it.
You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, and in your experience with that, you've also seen the science evolve from bench to bedside. And I'm just wondering what it's like for you to watch the ISP move into these human trials with results that show efficacy after all these years of preclinical research. What's that like for you as the inventor and as the scientist?
Yeah, this is also a great question to ask my wife of what it was like to live with me for the last 10 years as this is progressing through clinical trials. It's surreal. It's such a complex set of emotions between nerves and pride. I was talking to my wife that it must be how your daughter's competing in the Olympics and you're in the stands watching. And you are so proud of their accomplishments, but also incredibly nervous for what the future holds and how it will perform. But it's surreal. So I haven't been a part of NerveGen for quite some time, but they still will invite me to some important things. Like when the first patient was dosed in their phase 1 clinical trial, it was during COVID. We had a big party on Zoom. We all got together. There was the entire company and their consultants, and we all had a toast. And Jerry and I were able to tell the background stories of the program to the people and the regulatory specialists and their finance group that had not necessarily heard all the background. And now it was just nice to see it progressing in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, the results are certainly generating a lot of buzz. And I'm wondering for you, even though you're not directly involved in NerveGen, what stood out to you in the findings, knowing that there are probably a stack of data that hasn't yet been sorted through, but what stands out to you now?
So I love the design of this clinical trial. I thought to run it at the single center, to run it at the top, one of the top, if not the top rehab centers in the U.S. was a brilliant decision. To monitor electrical connectivity and reconnectivity before and after was a brilliant decision because all these patients are getting rehab and you're going to need to find a way to separate a rehab effect from a nerve regrowth effect. And then the results showing the 3x improvement in connectivity to the upper extremity, which I don't think had ever been shown before in acute or chronic, and the partial and the hand function restoration and the behaviors they were getting. That's what stood out to me. And the fact that they're now theoretically able to differentiate the rehab effect from the repair effect using these biomarkers and electrophysiology of actually recording nerve regrowth to muscles. As an aside on that, after the trial, I connected with you, and several of the patients have actually reached out to me, and I had a chance to talk to Leslie for quite some time.
Mm-hmm, Leslie Fuller.
Yeah, Leslie Fuller, who you've had on your podcast about her journey from a paralyzed mom from a car accident to being in a trial where she is now. And that is, again, I don't have the right, such a surreal conversation to see somebody that you've helped and the progress that she's made from before the trial to now, and all the complex human behaviors that aren't monitored, like blood pressure control and autonomic measurements. It's just surreal conversations.
I can't imagine what it is like for you as the inventor, because for us at Blink of an Eye Nonprofit, just having a small hand in giving the information to people at the right time and facilitating their being in the trial if it's the right decision for them, and then having them share. And it's, things that I think investors in the spinal cord injury world, and there's certainly a bit of a divide, something isn't successful unless you're walking again. But if you talk to most people spinal cord injured, the number one piece that they're really interested in is bowel and bladder function, sexual function, but also autonomic dysreflexia, to have that regulated again. But to learn that there has been from the stories, and we have others that I'd love to bring on to the podcast as well in time. But their stories, and they really range from not just functionality, but speed, that they were able to now do something and it keeps getting faster. Now, months and months later, for the some that were in the early months of the trial, the sense of smell being restored, sense of the senses being more heightened. I'm so appreciative of those who've been willing to share that, they just feel more alive. They feel sexier. Their dreams are more animated. They're seeing themselves in a really sensual kind of way. Just a number of life-altering experiences on joy for what is enlivened in the body and the mind-spirit connection. It's really, it's quite astounding. And so we feel some of that same, just such excitement to have been just a tiny part of this amazing process.
This is emotional for me. I have all the emotions flowing through me, that this small idea we came up with after a happy hour became this larger than life opportunity to help people in need.
Yes. I'm wondering, I'm sharing your emotional response, Brad, and I can't imagine the spilling that it must be for you. Were you surprised about some of the mixed media coverage?
Yes. As I said, like every day you go online or you turn on the TV and it's just negative news story after negative news story. And here we had a positive news story, a beacon of optimism for people that did not have that beacon of optimism in their life, that there is potential hope to restore function from a paralytic state or from paralysis. And it did not necessarily get the news coverage I was expecting. And I don't understand why. And I appreciate people like you raising awareness and the people that do the news stories on not necessarily NerveGen, the company, but the patients that have been through it and what they lived. Because I think that is the most important thing to the future of the treatment of spinal cord injury, is you have to understand what the patients went through and what they are still regaining or where their improvements were.
Yeah. I'm wondering, as a scientist on that, since Blink of an Eye, our nonprofit, is very closely in touch with the participants, might you opine on the length of time that people were in the study, and therefore what was the data that was accumulated for those three or 4 months, and what we are hearing about months and months later?
Well, yeah. So as you're alluding to, the trial was a 90-day trial where the patients were enrolled at Shirley Ryan for 90 days and got treatment once daily for 90 days. And I mean, it's absolute remarkable that they saw a restoration of hand function and reconnectivity in 90 days, because if you think about the course of human growth, it takes 10 months to grow a cell to an infant that's about yay big.
Yay big, and you've got your hands out, 20 inches.
20 inches. Your spinal cord is longer than that. So, and it just might take longer. So, this is my opinion, like what the questions that are open for me: what happens when you treat for longer? What happens when you treat for 6 months? What happens when you treat for 1 year? And I'm sure these discussions are being had by others as well. The 90-day limit was probably some agreement with the FDA, how you run this trial based on safety, but the safety seems pretty clean to me. So I would like to know what happens in a year what happens in 5 years when people continue to be on this therapy? Where do their improvements continue to be?
Yes. And if they're able to get more of it in the ongoing trials, everybody is. So for those who were in the trial who received the drug that showed efficacy, they're able to continue if they can find a doctor. And one would think it would not be difficult to have a sponsor doctor. So it basically becomes a trial of one for them to continue. And they're clamoring for that. And while it was 90 days, yes, as you mentioned, from the outset, they were having to agree to a 16-week that, all the assessments and things of that nature. But now that they've been through that, to be able to have more. And we're also, hearing from people that if they had any gait in walking, because it was quite a range of different people, that they've gotten faster. Yeah. What might have taken like many minutes to walk a few steps. It's so, which didn't show efficacy in total for the group that was there, but these longer range impacts, they're just exciting. They're phenomenal, and they have raised the level of hope and optimism, to extraordinary standards with a beautiful dose of reality.
I completely agree with you. It's very well said.
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier about the design of this program, and that it wasn't just the acute, but it was the chronic, the 1 to 10 years post-injury. How do you view NervGen's approach and how they may have challenged traditional assumptions about healing timeliness?
That's a very good question. As we talked about at the beginning of this, the old adage was use it or lose it. So you had to restore your nerves connectivity or find a new way to stimulate them. Otherwise, they would die. And that's a challenge for a spinal cord injury because it's not an acute disorder. It's a chronic disorder. You're injured and you live for quite some time post-injury. And people don't want to hear that they have no option of recovery years later.
Yeah.
And I think this challenges it, enrolling patients 1 to 10 years post-injury and showing significant improvements in connectivity and hand function challenges that dogma and provides hope to, I think, not just spinal cord injury, but other neurological injuries where you live for quite some time post a trauma. It's a traumatic brain injury, strokes, cerebral ischemias, hemorrhages, and these spinal cord conditions like spinal stroke or transverse myelinitis even. That these progressive diseases that you live for decades, maybe regrowing axons would work there as well.
We're excited about that. One of our most recent families whom we're serving, a young woman thought it was transverse myelitis, and then it was corrected by the physicians to be a spinal stroke. She does not qualify for the current trial underway for acute because she's not an acute spinal cord injured person. But she and perhaps many, many others, although there are very few of them, who experience that life-altering, waking up one day when your body is losing the ability to move by the hour. She is in that same boat of hopefulness for what will come. And I'm just wondering about, NVG-291. So it isn't just about acute spinal cord injury or acute that becomes chronic spinal cord injury. What potential do you see, Brad, for NVG-291 in treating conditions like MS or Alzheimer's?
Sure. Way back in my day when we were still working on this, we discussed this at length. What are the other conditions that scar-based inhibition plays a role in dysfunction or in neural dysfunction? What are the other conditions where the scarring and CSPGs in your nervous system prevent axons from regrowing or connecting? That led us to a couple of the manuscripts I discussed, the heart attack story and the peripheral nerve story as the low-hanging fruit. But then you can allow yourself to ponder a little more. But if you're tackling the low-hanging fruit, what about the more challenging conditions? The shadow plaques and MS lesions are full of CSPG. They're basically a scarred off area. What about regrowing axons through the shadow plaque? That would be in MS. The plaques of a Alzheimer's patient are also full of CSPGs and scars, and these patients' brains are riddled with it at the end of their lives. What about Alzheimer's disease? I mean, it's my opinion that the most efficient route forward for nerve gen is spinal cord injury, but I think the opportunity is there outside of spinal cord injury. Once they have the tool to anatomically regrow axons, it's now an application for it, much like the hot topic now would be the Ozempic, the GLP-1 antagonist, and where else can it be deployed? They're seeing people that have decreased addictive behaviors and decreased OCD behaviors, and just finding new applications for this interesting tool. And I think outside of diabetes and weight loss, and I think that's a potential for them. And I mean, it's just my opinion, but we thought about this more than a decade ago and started these collaborations. But it's just still great to see this still continuing forwards for spinal cord injury, which has always been my passion. Even though I don't have a family connection to it, it's just, I felt it was the greatest area of unmet need that I could work on. And just seeing this progressing forward is amazing.
We thank you for your years of dedication and your wisdom and working alongside the woman who became your wife, and both of you so committed to this work. And, you know, as we begin to wind down, I'm just wondering, you speak about, you've been involved in the translation of very complex science into these treatments. And you now speak about the translation of the translation. Once we get, you know, some answers from these trials, the various applications that there are. Is there any particular lesson that you'd like to, that you have learned that you might want to share with other scientists?
Very, very good question. I've had the opportunity to work with a few absolutely brilliant minds. So my undergraduate advisor, Regu Vemiganti, then Jerry Silver, and then recently with Derek Rossi, who is the founder of Moderna, was the CEO, was and still is the CEO of Conbella Therapeutics, and just learning from them along the way. The key lesson, I mean, it's simplifying, but drug discovery is hard. It's challenging. It takes time. Jerry's career arc is 40 plus years, leading to a single, from anatomical observation that there are chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans in development, to SCAR, to PTP sigma, to ISP, or what it's now called NVG-291R. And it's that everything takes time and effort and funding. I've also learned, probably more recently, that unfortunately good ideas die all the time. They don't get funded, they're given up on, or they don't get leadership. In biotech, people bet the jockey, not necessarily the horse. And if you can't get the right leader involved in it to progress it forward, then your idea won't move forward.
Indeed, a perfect storm for good. I really appreciate that. And I'm wondering about the families and individuals who are living with spinal cord injury right now, because it does seem as though all this time devoted by Jerry Silver, 40 plus years, and others, many of whom you've named, if we are standing at the edge of a new era in neuro repair, would be the message that you would shout out or at least whisper to families?
Yeah, it's coming. Just everything takes time. Now there's optimism. It's coming. Is my message. And I mean, we couldn't say that 10 years ago.
Yes.
The 10 years ago was, we're working on it, and now it's coming. So we have more optimism than ever before.
And if I could just push the envelope on that, it's coming not just in your lifetime, but coming relatively soon.
Yeah, coming.
I think like 5 years, 10 years?
Oh, hard to say. That's a really challenging. I think NerveGen will have some interesting meetings with the FDA this year. And then, I mean, outside of NerveGen and outside of biologics, advances are being made in robotics every day, in brain-machine interfaces, people pushing the envelope in stimulators.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan with Chet Moritz. I know he has a company out of University of Washington, and what he's been able to do, I think it's onward with stimulators. And I met him probably in 2011. I've always been a huge fan of the work he's doing. So it's not just in biologics and repair tools. I still don't think, even if we have a magic bullet, it's not just going to be a magic bullet. It is going to take the entire field coming together to help these people. The stimulators, the brain-machine interfaces, the prosthetics and robotic tools available, along with the biologics and drugs.
That is one thing that the SCI community seems to be moving in the direction of this multi-faceted approach, and that we need it all.
Yeah, I think there are easy applications for some of the robotic systems and simulators. The bladder control is not that complex of a muscle, and maybe that's one that is simply targeted. But the simulator tools, I'm a big fan of what they're working on.
Yeah, cause for great optimism.
Yeah, in this lifetime, not in the next lifetime.
Right, in this lifetime, absolutely, and I can't thank you enough. I'm just thinking as one last piece, since you mentioned that you had spoken at the memorial service for Jerry Silver, is there anything that you would want all of us as a closing comment to remember about this remarkable man who has so impacted your life and where we are now?
I would love for him to be sitting alongside of me today, playing color commentary and emphasis on this conversation. He had the ability to predict where science was going and predict what was impactful with science, and just recruit and collaborate with the most brilliant minds available to make it happen. He'll be missed by not just the people that work closely with him, myself, and all of the graduate students and postdoctoral fellows and techs and undergraduates. There are probably hundreds of us, but just the entire scientific community as a whole. Everyone knew him. Everyone liked him. It would be greatly, greatly missed.
In honor of you, Jerry Silver, and we feel his spirit as we speak. Well, sending love to you, Brad. Thank you for all your work.
And again, I appreciate all the hard work you do about raising awareness, and your foundation is incredible and plays this just critical mission in getting these patients and supporting these patients to when their life changes in an instant. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Brad's work shows us that progress in spinal cord injury research is built slowly over time through persistence with years of replication in laboratories and through sometimes happen-chance collaboration, all with a dedicated belief in big ideas and what could be possible. Brad shared not only the groundbreaking research for spinal cord injury recovery, but also the emotional weight of dedicating a life to solving problems that have challenged science for decades. These recent breakthroughs are a reminder that the path to real change is long, but with vision, determination, and backing of those who are willing to take an underwriting risk, new possibilities can and often do emerge. The invention of ISP and the science behind Nerve Gen point towards a future where damaged spinal cord nerves, thought beyond repair, can regrow, offering not only hope, but validation for what was thought impossible to become possible. You're listening to Blink of an Eye. I'm Louise Phipps-Sempt. See you next time. Together, we are raising the vibration for healing. Life can change in the blink of an eye. See you next week when we talk with Anthony Tussler on his 70 years of wisdom living with a spinal cord injury. If you're not already subscribed to Blink of an Eye podcast, please do so wherever you stream your podcast. Just hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free. And tell your friends. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider a charitable donation in any amount to Blink of an Eye nonprofit at blinkofaneye.org. Your generosity helps us operate the only SCI Navigator support program for newly injured SCI families by SCI families in the country. We understand spinal cord injury trauma. Sending love. Life can change in the blink of an eye.
You've been listening to Blink of an Eye. We ask that you share this with anyone who may need inspiration, a lift, or who may relate. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to Blink of an Eye on our website, blinkofaneyepodcast.com, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.